Roll up for the greatest show in the galaxy. Today, I bring with me a box. But it's not any old box. It's a box that will test your courage, your daring, your stupidity. What's inside my box? Is it a trinket or a chain? Or some pieces of brain? A mousetrap, some cheese, a terminal disease? The only way to be sure is to go on up and open the door. Put your hand deep inside. See if you stay alive. Enough of that. We'll come back to the box in a minute. So today we are going to talk about fear. And to begin with, I want to give you some more music. I want to give you a description of two animals. And I want to see which one you think is the most scary. So the first one is big, muscular, has razor-sharp claws, is capable of killing you, is naturally aggressive, and has huge fangs. The second animal is small, harmless, naturally quite timid, afraid of humans by nature, furry and placid. So by a show of hands, who thinks the first animal is the most scary? Very good, you're very compliant, thank you. The first animal is one of these, a foul beastie, known as my cat. He has razor-sharp claws, which he loves to place into my testicles at every available opportunity. He's got sharp fangs. Cats are predators by nature. They hunt, they kill, they eat other animals. And in their, well, he's never particularly hunted me, it has to be said. But in their bigger variety, cats are more than capable of hunting humans. We're very tasty, and they like us. Well, you know, they like to eat us. They don't like us as drinking partners. The second animal is one of these. Oh, good. No winces. That's helpful. Could be very helpful later. So this is a spider. Now, spiders, on balance, you know, there's a lot of species of them, but your average spider is pretty timid, doesn't really like humans. They tend to like dark, clammy sort of places, and humans are not generally very dark and clammy, your armpits maybe, but, you know, on balance, they'd rather not be crawling on us, you know, compared to many other places where they might crawl. They're generally quite timid. They don't really want to take us on because, you know, we're quite a lot bigger. Some of them are quite furry, quite soft and furry, in fact. And they're generally not much of a threat to us. There's not a lot that your average spider can do. Now, there are some exceptions. Funnel webs, for example, have what I would term an attitude problem. And they don't give a shit that humans are a lot bigger than them. They'll take you on any day of the week, no matter what. They sit in toilet bowls and have, well, not in this country, fortunately. They sit in toilet bowls and have a bit of a habit of biting you on the arse. Which might seem antisocial, but I guess if you woke up one morning and, you know, opened your bleary eyes to the dawn of a new day, looked up at your bedroom ceiling and it had turned into a massive anus, you might well have a little bite of it too. Perhaps you wouldn't, I don't know. Anyway, probably revealing a bit too much about my inner self. Anyway, so cats again. Cats scary, fangs and all that. I just wanted to prove he's got a fang. You can see it. Just look. There it is. Fang. Nasty, nasty, evil creature. So why is it that if you look, especially in Western countries, you find many, many people more fearful of spiders than you do of cats? Cats are, objectively much more of a threat to us than spiders are, but it's quite unusual to find someone with a fear of cats, and it's relatively common to find people with fear of spiders. In my whole life, I think I've only ever met one person who had a fear of cats. But I've met many with fears of spiders, myself included. So, we're going to talk about fear. So what's the difference between a typical fear and an atypical fear? So the first thing we're going to kind of look at is the fact that fear is quite a normal part of developing. So we need to sort of distinguish between what's a kind of a typical fear and an atypical fear. So, to have an atypical fear or a phobia, I think Robin mentioned in the lecture last week, there's a classification system for mental health problems generally. There are a few of them actually. There's one called ICD, but there's another one called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is currently being revised, but at the moment it's in its 4th edition. There's a 5th one. Basically, lots of people are arguing about what's put in it at the moment, and it's all quite controversial. So we'll stick with the 4th edition because we actually know what's going on in that. Now, to have a phobia of something, so this is an atypical fear or an excessive fear, to the degree that you might go and kind of actually get sort of treatment for it, it has to be a marked and persistent fear. So it has to be excessive or unreasonable. So a fear of lions, for example, is not excessive or unreasonable. That's a perfectly reasonable fear to have because a lion might well eat you. However, if, in this country you had a fear of lions, that may be excessive because you're not likely to actually come into contact with them. Fear of guns, for example, also not excessive. Guns are very dangerous things, likely to kill you, so that would not class as a phobia, unless you were in an environment where you were so utterly unlikely to ever come into contact with a gun and it was still really kind of stressing you out, the fact there might be guns around, then that may qualify as some kind of anxiety disorder. To be a specific phobia, your fear has to be cued by a specific object, but it doesn't have to be that specific. It just has to be sort of a fairly discrete group of things. So spider phobics, for example, are quite often not particularly happy about, I know spiders are not insects, but they look a bit like insects. They're quite often not very happy about other insecty type things. So it's fairly rare that you would find a spider phobic who also was suddenly perfectly happy with, kind of having a stick insect on their head or something. Normally, it's kind of similar sorts of things, but quite a discrete group of similar sorts of things. And really that's to distinguish a specific phobia from things like generalized anxiety, where you're showing a lot of worry and things like that, to a kind of a general set of situations rather than a sort of fairly discrete set of situations. The stimulus that creates fear in you has to produce immediate anxiety. It's no good if you see something and then 10 minutes later you suddenly have a panic attack. It's got to be a sort of a fairly instantaneous effect. So even sort of seeing it in your peripheral vision can be enough to trigger sort of quite severe levels of anxiety. Generally, phobics recognise that their fear is irrational. If you talk to a spider phobic, they often believe quite outlandish things, but they know that the things that they believe are outlandish. So, for example, as I hinted, I'm not particularly great with spiders, and tarantulas, in particular, they sort of molt. I don't know what the word is. They basically get rid of their skins as they grow, so they shed their exoskeleton and pop out of it and leave this sort of dead, spidery-looking thing laying on the ground. And when I discovered this, I was absolutely mortified, because the one thing that had, in terms of spiders, the one thing that has kind of kept me relatively okay about living in a world full of spiders is that I knew all this stuff about spiders don't really like humans. I thought, well, your average spider, they're not going to come near me because I could kill them. So, it's not very sensible for them to kind of come and sort of give me a hard time or freak me out. But I thought, if it was already dead, it'd have nothing to lose. So, if that sort of spidery skin could somehow reanimate and come to life, then it wouldn't be scared of humans, because it'd be like, well, I'm dead anyway. What difference is it going to make? I can just go and freak out the humans. They can kill me all they like. Who cares? I'm already dead. And that really, really freaked me out, because notwithstanding the fact that dead things generally don't come back to life and sort of reanimate themselves and run around after you, I thought, maybe it could happen. And I knew that was sort of a ridiculous fear to have, or a ridiculous thought to have. But nevertheless, I had it. And I'm sure if any of you are freaked out by spiders, and you watched too many horror films when you were a teenager as well, that thought's going to travel with you out of this lecture and through the rest of your God-forsaken lives. Phobics avoid the situation of which they're phobic, and this avoidance has to interfere with daily life. So this is it's kind of a big deal in terms of diagnosis. So a good example of this is there was a woman, it was my friend, it's my school friend's mother, who, I don't know, she was never actually diagnosed with a phobia, but she blatantly had one. she didn't like spiders, but she also didn't like crane flies. So every sort of September, October, there don't seem to be as many of them now as there were when I was young, but these sort of crane flies come along. Do you know the ones I mean? They're sort of leggy and they have wings. So they're a bit like flying spiders, really, which, if you don't like spiders, is not a good thing. And she used to have a routine when it was daddy longlegs season or crane fly season. Basically, she couldn't leave the house. So she had to, even if it was like baking hot, she'd have all the windows closed so that daddy longlegs couldn't come into the house. And then when they left the house, I mean, I suppose, in a sense, you know, it was good that she actually left the house. But they had this sort of little routine where they had a porch at the front of their house, and basically her husband would go out into the porch and he'd search around to make sure there were no crane flies in there. And once he'd had a search, he would leg it out of the porch and go to the car, which would be parked, you know, a couple of metres away from the porch. At that point, the woman who was scared would go into the porch, knowing, you know, it was free from crane flies, and then the husband would go on this sort of search around the car. So if there were any on the car, he'd brush them off and he'd wave them off so they'd fly away, or any on the fences or the walls nearby, he'd brush them off and wave them away. He'd look under the car in case there were any particularly sneaky crane flies that might be kind of hiding under there, waiting to jump out at the most inappropriate opportunity. And only once, you know, he'd cleared the way, could this poor woman actually leave the house. And then she had a fly swat with her at all times, and she would leave the house, kind of waving this fly swat around her, and then kind of dive into the car, Starsky and Hutch style, and, you know, there you go. Now, you can imagine my friend and I were always plotting these devious plans of hiding crane flies in shoe boxes or putting one in the car to freak her out or something. I don't think we ever did, but that's why I grew up to become a caring, sharing psychologist that I am. The point is, like, you know, it's a funny story in a way, but it wasn't funny for her at all. So if they wanted to go out anywhere, this added half an hour to their time leaving the house. If they wanted to go from wherever it was they were, that would add another half an hour because of this sort of checking ritual. So, you know, arguably this interfered with their daily life quite a lot. Now, as I said, she didn't stop going out of the house, so in a way, she'd found a way to cope with it, which is really good. But I think, you know, that starts to qualify as sort of behaviour that is kind of significantly interfering with your ability to kind of do the normal things that you want to do. So that's one of the reasons why I say, you know, I think she would pretty clearly classify as having a phobia. Has to have a minimum duration of 6 months, and that's just because fears do naturally wax and wane, and people can get quite fearful of things, and that fear will just kind of go of its own accord. And within this diagnostic manual, there are, you know, lots of other diagnoses that you can have. So to have your sort of main diagnosis as being a specific phobia, that would have to be the thing that best explains the symptoms that you're presenting with. So you'd have a look around at, you know, other anxiety disorders and make sure there is something specific about spiders or whatever, and, you know, it's not a generalized anxiety, or, you know, it's not a product of some sort of bigger problem. So that's what you need to have a clinical anxiety. But, as I said, fear is quite a normal part of growing up. So here's a graph of some research. It's quite old research, but it does illustrate the point quite nicely, of the sort of developmental pattern of fears. This is not phobic fears. This is just sort of mild anxieties that children sort of naturally have. So this is looking at groups of children. Doesn't mean every single child will have these sorts of fears, but at the group level, this is how sort of fears develop over different ages. So to begin with, let's have a look at fears of injury and physical danger. If you look at very young children, sort of 4 to 6 year olds, typically not very many of them report having fears of injury or physical, or, you know, sort of physical danger to them. But as they start to get older, as they develop cognitively and become, I guess, more aware of some of the threats in the world, the percentage of people reporting those sorts of fears goes up. Now you can see even at 10 or 12, it's only about half of the sample are reporting those sorts of fears. But nevertheless, it shows a sort of developmental trend that when you're very young, you just don't worry about that sort of thing. And as you go up, as you get older, you start to become more concerned. With some of these other fears, you get exactly the opposite pattern. So they diminish with age, and presumably actually with cognitive development. So if you look at fears of monsters and ghosts, they're very, very high in very young children. So a big proportion of children report fears of those. But as children get older, up until about 10 to 12, those fears have really sort of dropped off to nothing. You get a similar sort of trend with animal fears. They're not particularly prevalent in 10 to 12-year-olds, but in younger children, you get a much higher proportion of kids reporting them. So again, that seems to be something that kind of drifts off as, you know, a child presumably gets more develops more cognitive understanding of the actual threats of animals. Bedtime fears sort of peak at about 6 to 8, and again they drop off towards the teenage years. And related to that, nighttime fears show a very, very similar pattern. So in terms of nightmares and stuff, they're actually fairly high percentages of children reporting them up until about the age of 8, and then they start dropping off in the sort of 4 years after that. So fear is a very, very, very normal part of growing up. So what we're really going to try to look at in this lecture is how, given that a large proportion of people do experience fears in their childhood, what makes the difference between those fears kind of just waxing and waning and drifting off of their own accord, and then maybe becoming sort of pervasive anxieties that persist into adulthood and cause significant problems to the person. Well, there's a very famous quote by Franklin Roosevelt from the 1930s who said, "There is nothing to fear but fear itself." Now, he was wrong, because there's loads of scary shit in the world, and he wasn't really taking account of that. But his basic point was, you can overcome fears. Fears are to some extent all in the mind. But I think it's worth bearing in mind that although fear is all in the mind, fear does actually serve a very, very adaptive function. There are very, very good reasons why we have a fear response and why we need it. Fear is completely adaptive. Without it, we would, as organisms, be in an awful lot of trouble. So, across... The slide's not working. All right, there we go. So, humans have a fight... Well, actually, all species have a fight-or-flight system. Now, in humans, there's a system in the brain, or a neural set of circuits called the behavioural inhibition system. And within that, there is the amygdala. Now, you've probably been taught about the amygdala before. The amygdala does several very, very important things. And in particular, it regulates the fight-or-flight response. So it's linked up to your central nervous system, your sympathetic nervous system, and it acts very, very automatically. And it can do one of two things. It can either make you, well, it can probably do other things as well, but in the context of this lecture, it can do one of two things. It can make you aggressive, or it can make you sort of fearful. So it really does influence the fight or the flight. So if it makes you sort of flightful, if you like, what it's basically doing is it will pump adrenaline through your body, and that has the effect of increasing your lung function. It increases your heart efficiency as well, so you get lots of blood pumping around your body, so that prepares you for doing something, fighting or flighting. Your pupils will dilate, and the conventional wisdom is that your pupils dilate to let more light in, so you're better able to see what you're confronted with. And it shuts down your digestion, so that's to conserve energy. So it basically means you can put all of your energy either into the fighting or the flighting. Now, interestingly, there's slight gender differences here. So on balance, obviously, this is at the group level, men are more likely to fight in a given situation, and women are more likely to flight in a given situation, very generally speaking. There are obviously individual differences in how sensitive this system is. So not everyone responds to a given situation in the same way. As I said, there are gender differences. There are genetic sensitivities. So some people are known as trait anxious, and one of the theories behind that is just that this behavioural inhibition system is a bit hypersensitive, and so its threshold for experiencing threat is much, much lower than in low trait anxious people. And there can also be environmental influences, so differences in the way that people interpret what's going on around them that can affect the development of this system as well. So I'm going to illustrate to you the fight or flight mechanism with a little video. So here are two cats. The one on your right is my cat, and the one on the left is someone's cat off the internet. Now, one of the things that you'll notice if you have a cat is they really don't like bananas very much, as a general rule. A banana to a cat is like something very unpleasant to a human. I can't think of an example. So they don't like them. So they have one of two choices. Now, as you can see, the cat over here, he thinks on balance, he can probably take the banana on. So his aggression is coming out. He's decided to fight. Whereas my Moggy, he's 60. He's not as brave as he used to be. He's decided that the banana is probably going to get the better of him,
and he'll just run away. The running away is there you go. There, he's off. He's off. Again, don't put that banana near me. Terrible things. If you happen to have a cat, I thoroughly recommend the banana experiment. But if your cat's a kind of a fighter, you do have to be a bit careful because they're pretty quick with the old claw. And I've got many a scratch on the finger from the teasing the cat with a banana thing. You should never tease your pets. It's very bad. It makes you a bad human being. So fear is the fight or flight system it's ubiquitous across species. My cat has it. If you have a dog, your dog will have it. Humans have it. And it is there to help us to survive. We have the amygdala, and the amygdala's purpose, in a way, very simplified, is to keep us alive. It operates this fight or flight system so that we can survive things that might happen to us. If we didn't have it, just imagine for a moment a world where our I don't know what the plural is, amygdalae or something, our amygdalae have all been sucked out by aliens because they came down and they thought, oh, we don't want any of this fight or flight shit, we just want to take over the world, so we'll suck out all of their amygdalas. Basically, what would happen is you'll become a member of the jackass crew. So you would start to throw yourself off cliffs, beat your own testicles with a hammer, stick your head in a bucket of jellyfish. You do stuff like that because you would have no fear. You would just think, yeah, BMXing down off the edge of a cliff. It's a great idea. Yeah, no problem. I'll survive. So it's a good job that we have this kind of system in place. It keeps us alive. It stops us being a member of Jackass, and that's quite a helpful thing, as helpful things go. Right, back to the box. So I mentioned I had a box. It's there. It's quite close to you. But don't let that worry you. Now, what is the deal with the box? Well, the deal with the box... Oops, sorry. I need to stop this a minute. Deal with the box is, in my lab, so I do research on fear, and we have to keep various objects in the lab so that when we sort of test people, we sort of test out their fears. And we test out their fears by getting them to engage with certain things. So we have like a collection of various things that are commonly feared by people. There is one thing in particular in our lab that I am terrified of. And basically, I thought I would use a section of this lecture. It's the last lecture of term. Thought we'd have a bit of fun. Fun in a lecture? Never. I thought we'd try and have a bit of fun and help me to overcome my fear. So my fear is such that I can bring that box closed over here, no problem. But what we did a bit earlier on was my research assistant made a film of me trying to touch the thing in that box. So I'm strapped up to a heart monitor, and that goes through a bit of gadgetry that amplifies my heart rate as I'm doing this task. So we'll have a look how I got on. So, to help me out, I need a volunteer. So, we don't, bearing in mind, nothing bad will happen to you. Can I have a volunteer? Are you a brave sort of person?
We'll see.
We'll see. If you said no, I would have definitely picked you. Okay, come on. I need you to sit on this chair. You got tattoos. You'll be hard as nails. Right, this is your flag of surrender.
Okay.
Okay, so take hold of that.
Okay.
And what I want you to do, it's a white flag, because back in the day, that's there's a little T-shirt we give to the children. Back in the day, if you wanted to surrender, you would wave a white flag. So I didn't have a white flag, but I did have a white T-shirt, so that's the best I could do. So what I want you to do is to use that as an indicator of how nervous you're feeling. So this would be the least nervous I've ever been in my life, and that would be like, you know, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, or something like that. So that's going to be our gauge of whether you're feeling anxious or not. Okay, and here is the box. Which I'm feeling much happier about because it's got a lid on it. Right, so what we're going to do to begin with is, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to view the lecture from there for a little while, is we're going to, again, talk a bit about fear, and we're going to see how your flag waving goes. So, we're going to talk a bit about evolution. And there are various evolutionary theories about why we might be scared of certain things. So as I said, fear is very adaptive, but it's also the case that it's easier to acquire fears of certain things than others. So there's a theory called preparedness theory, which says that there are certain things in the world, spiders, snakes, stuff like that, where we can more easily acquire a fear. So we're not born to fear them, but on balance, it's easier for us to learn a fear of these things. So we've been sort of biologically prepared to... Oh, it's just wrong. So 8 eyes. It's just freaky. I think this might be the clip where it starts licking them. Which is just, oh, and this, right? Oh my God. Just check this out, right? Look at that! That's just a freak. Anyway, preparedness. Like I was saying, so the evolutionary theory is that because these things were a threat to our biological ancestors, we've kind of, the people that were naturally a bit wary of certain things like snakes and spiders have passed on their genes, and so people nowadays have, you know, kind of got a bit of a propensity to learn about, to learn to fear certain things. So it doesn't mean we'll all have like spider phobias, it just means that we're more likely to get one than we are, say, a phobia of, you know, this microphone, for example. So there's also an evolutionary theory around why certain adult fears might exist. So if you track back adult phobias, things like social phobia tend to start in the teenage years, animal phobias tend to start around 6 to 8, and things like fear of water and heights start from a very, very young age indeed. So again, the theory is that there's a biological relevance to these fears. So, at a very young age, if you're an infant, you're very defenseless, so you're more likely to just be scared of strange things in your environment. So that's why you get lots of height and water fears that develop very, very early in life. Things like animals, as you grow a bit bigger, you're more able to defend yourself, but you're not really, because you're still, you know, if you're sort of 5 or 6, you're like that big. So you can't really defend yourself, but you're more autonomous. You're not reliant on your parents anymore or your tribe or whatever to protect you. So you can run off and get yourself into all sorts of trouble. So that's why we have a gene for being sort of slightly wary of animals around the age of sort of 6 to 8. But then that drops off as you get to sort of teenage years and you're a bit sort of bigger and stronger. But social fears then become more important because, you know, you're in your... How's your flag going? It's not too bad. You've habituated a bit to being in front of 200 people. That's very good. Social fears, your position in your sort of your tribe or your social group becomes more important, and so that's why you get more sorts of fears as you kind of get older. More social fears as you get older. Okay, so the next thing I want to do, a little demonstration, is I'm going to show you, at least I think that's what I'm going to do. Is that what I'm going to do? Yeah, I'm going to show you a picture, but it's going to be presented very rapidly. Now, normally what happens is this doesn't work the first time and I have to do it again. So, here's... Did that not work? No, that didn't work. See? Told you it never works the first time. So here's the picture. So it's going to be very, very rapidly presented. I'm doing this deliberately because I want to see if you can spot what it is. Did anyone spot it? A spider. So our systems, our attentional systems, are geared up to detect threat very, very automatically. So I was talking about the fight or flight response being very automatic. You're still quite calm, that's good. So it's been very, very automatic. And that means that we can detect stuff very, very rapidly. We can spot what's going on, like that. We don't even have to think about it. So all of you well, not all of you, but a lot of you in the room could very easily make a snap decision about something that was presented to you for the minimal amount of time that I could actually put it up on the screen and for it to be vaguely visible to you. So even with that little sensory input, you could make a decision. That's a spider. So our systems are, like I say, are biologically kind of hardwired to seek out these sorts of threats in our environment. Okay, so back to our box. Now, what I'm going to do is just apply a little blindfold.
Does it have to be Arsenal?
Yeah, I'm afraid it does. If it's any consolation, our season's going very badly. Okay, can you see?
No.
Is that vaguely comfortable?
It's fine.
Okay. So how are you feeling now? Any worse?
Still okay, I think.
Still okay. Okay. Let's see what we can do about that. Boom! No good? No, right. I told you, you're hard as nails, you've got tattoos. Okay, so why have I blindfolded our volunteer? Well, it's because fear is likely to be heightened when we don't have much visual input. That's why you get people being scared of the dark. That's why if you're walking home on a dark night, down in Brighton, back from a nightclub or something, if you go into a road where there's no street lights, you are likely to start feeling slightly more anxious because your perceptual system can't see very well, and it's basically telling you, ooh, well, we better beware because we can't see what threats are around us. Also, you're quite sensitive to your interoceptive cues, which means that if your heart is racing, like it was just then, that should, obviously it kind of has to be your own heart, not just someone else's heart played through some speakers. But I was trying to illustrate the point. You're sensitive to your own heartbeat. So as you sense your heart getting faster, that is sort of a vicious cycle. That makes you more anxious because you can hear that you're getting anxious, and that makes you more nervous to that as well. Now, the box. We've got to get back to the box. I need to do something with this box. So can you just for a minute imagine what you think is in the box and how you feel about interacting with that thing? You thinking about it? What's the worst possible thing? Actually, have you got any fears?
What, of objects?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't want existential things.
No.
Fear of failure.
I just want to know what it is. It's more curiosity.
It's curiosity? Oh, you were the wrong volunteer then. I don't want curiosity. I want fear. So what's the worst, from your point of view, what's the worst possible thing that could be in it?
Something probably ridiculous, some sort of worm or something like that. I hate worms.
A worm?
Which is quite irrational, but I will.
Just wondering whether there's any worms I can quickly go and get. I don't think so. There's no grass around here. I could do the whole seagull thing, go stamping on my feet, see if I can get some, but I think we might overrun if I do that. So a wormy thing would not be good. Do you want to just have a little feel? Just, it's all right. I've got to be careful how I do this. I'm going to do it so hopefully I can't see too much. Oh dear. So can I just grab your hand a minute?
Yeah. Okay.
Did you get it?
Yeah.
What do you think it? It was a bit slimy, wasn't it?
Prickly. No.
Prickly.
Weird.
Not slimy?
No.
I've just realised on the kind of webcast, none of this is going to be visible. There's just going to be me saying, "Can I take your hand?" Ooh. It's a bit slimy, isn't it? So, okay, little bit prickly. Prickly and slimy. That's what we've got up here. You're still not nervous, though, are you? So are you ready to do like a full-on going and touching the thing in the box?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
You're not scared?
Not yet.
Oh, man. I've thrown everything at you. I've blindfolded you. I've given you the heartbeat. I've done everything. Told you I should never pick someone with a tattoo. Okay. Sorry, take your hand again. Let's go and give it a good grab. What does it feel like?
Is there only one thing? What's the other things in there?
I don't know, you tell me.
Oh, that's a bit of a letdown.
Why?
Because I thought it was going to be something cool and creepy. Or
That's what my wife always says.
Well, I really hope yours doesn't feel like that, because that'd be really weird.
Okay, right, take your hand out. Take your blindfold off. Well done, you've helped me overcome my fear of slightly disco-lighty rubber caterpillars. The other thing's a chocolate, which you can take for your participation.
Thank you.
So,
I was hoping it was a spider.
as if. So, round of applause for our very, very brave volunteer. You can return to your... You can stay there if you like. So what was I trying to demonstrate with all of this? What I was trying to demonstrate is, essentially, that we can overcome all of this stuff. We don't have to be fearful. We know, so for example, you knew, in the context of a lecture, I'd be very unlikely to scare the crap out of someone because I'd probably get the sack. So it didn't matter what I did. I could blindfold you, I could play you heartbeats, I could show you slightly, misleading videos of spiders to maybe try and put your mind on a certain train of thought. But you kind of know that I'm not going to do anything bad to you because I'm a nice kind of person. So we can overcome these things. So we may be misled in all sorts of ways, but we can get over it. So fear is a subjective thing. Now, remember we were talking in the cognition and clinical context lecture about things like biases and attention, of which there is plenty of evidence that anxious people or people in states of anxiety can misinterpret things that they see or have these attentional biases to threat. Well, let's go back to that picture I showed you, the very rapidly presented picture. It was a flower. Now, if you don't believe me, we'll have a look at it again. Promise you, it's the same thing. It's a picture of that flower. But, because I've primed you with lots of pictures of spiders and talked about spiders the whole way through the lecture, in that split instant where your brain had to make a decision about whether that was something threatening or not, now, not necessarily all of you would have seen that as a spider, but a good many of you did think, oh, that's probably a spider, because it looks a bit spidery, and you've been primed in a certain kind of way. But, like I say, we can overcome these sorts of things. So how does fear work? Well, essentially, this big elaborate example that I did was just a way to highlight lots of the pathways to fear, so how fears develop. We know that some of it is genetic, so some of it is down to, about a third is down to genes, and the rest is down to kind of shared or non-shared environments. So that means our environmental influences, when we're very, very, very little, do have an impact. So the genetic influence is can come out in terms of personality characteristics. So if you look at sort of personality theories, trait anxious people are typically neurotic introverts. So they score high on neuroticism, high on introversion. Again, not always, but just in general. So there's personality characteristics which will be tied in, obviously, with your genetics as well. In terms of learning experiences, well, there's there's more influences you can have, but I'm just going to talk about 4 potential pathways. And these are known as Rachman's pathways, because he was the first person to sort of name them all, really. There was a very classic study called the Watson and Rayner study, which is a good way to illustrate the first pathway. So basically, Albert was a 1-month-old infant. No, he wasn't 1 month old, he was 9 months old. I don't know what I'm talking about. And he was basically, fairly unafraid of certain things. And what Watson and Rayner did was they verified that a loud noise would upset him. So they struck a bar with a claw hammer, and that made him upset. Then what they did was, whenever he was in close proximity to a rat, so they did this a few times, they would bang the claw hammer and make him upset. He didn't actually cry, I don't think, but he showed signs of distress. So they did that sort of 2 or 3 times over a few weeks or whatever, and they found that after a while, even in the absence of the loud noise, he would show visible signs of distress around the rat. So he had learnt to fear the rat. So this is the idea behind direct traumatic experiences. So why might you acquire a fear of something? Well, maybe you have a bad experience with it, essentially. And if it's a spider or a snake, you're more likely to pick up that fear than if it was something a bit more random, like a pen. So you've got this kind of event, this traumatic event, that naturally evokes a fearful response. So that event is called a US or unconditioned stimulus, and that evokes an unconditioned response. It naturally makes you feel anxious. So that could be a loud bang or something like that. We've got this CS, which is the rat. That's a conditioned stimulus that ordinarily doesn't evoke fear. But what happens is if those two events become associated in your memory, then when you see the rat, it activates a representation of trauma, and through that representation, you end up having a fear response to the rat. So basic bad experiences can make you fearful of things. There's a picture of Albert, just to demonstrate the torture he was undergoing in the name of science. So Rachman's pathways, they talk about this direct experience, but they also talk about vicarious learning and verbal information. What's vicarious learning? I showed you a video of me trying to put my hand in a box that did not contain a rubber thing, and that's vicarious learning. You're watching my reaction to doing that. I didn't like it, I was screwing up my face. Admittedly, I wasn't like screaming with terror or anything, but vicarious learning doesn't have to be anything dramatic. It's just watching other people's reactions to things and picking up information about what's scary through seeing their responses. Verbal information, self-evidently, is people just telling you that things are scary. Don't do that, it might bite you, that sort of thing. And when we talk about fear responses, really we're interested in how that affects cognition, the way you think, your behaviour. So is it the case that you would avoid something because you're scared of it? And also your physiology, does your heart rate go up? So the question is, do these pathways actually work? In terms of experimental research, one of the things we can do, obviously, we don't want to go around traumatising children, but we can do sort of very mild sort of experiments where, for example, we give children information about new animals that they've never encountered. So this could either be verbal information, like a little story where the animal sort of behaves in a nasty or unpleasant way, or it could be a vicarious learning kind of experience where they just see pictures of the animals and then maybe photographs of someone looking scared or photographs of someone looking happy. And what you do is you measure what they think of the animals. You measure their sort of subjective cognitions about how nice or nasty they think the animals are. And you do this before and after they've been exposed to the story or to watching visual images of people looking scared or looking happy. So some animals, they'll hear a threatening story or a story where the animal's portrayed in a threatening way, or they hear a positive story, or there's a control where they hear none. And we can measure their avoidance a bit like with this box sort of task here, where we have like a box, an animal box, and we ask them whether they'd like to put their hand in the box to stroke the animal. And if they don't, or if they take a long time to do it, then that's a sort of a mild sign of avoidance. So what you find is, for example, if you give children verbal information about a new animal that they've never encountered, well, typically they'll start off pretty ambivalent about it. If anything, they're a little bit positive. So on this scale, a low score is positive. 0 would be like no fear beliefs at all, and 4 would be completely maximum response to all the fear beliefs questions. So on balance, normally they're, if anything, a bit on the positive side because they're furry animals and children tend to like furry animals. And if you measure them repeatedly over a 6-month period, they'll stay fairly positive about those animals. However, if you tell them a story where the animal is portrayed negatively, then their beliefs shift. So their cognitions about those animals it's not rocket science. You tell them stuff, they believe you. So their fear beliefs about those animals change, but they stay changed over quite a long period of time until you sort of debrief them or tell them some opposite information or something like that. And if you give them positive information, it has the reverse effect. They get even more positive, so their fear beliefs go down even more, and they stay down over quite a long period. So that's just from telling them a story where the animal is portrayed in certain ways. If you look at how quickly they'll approach a box to stroke the animal after that information, well, you find basically the 0 line is the average time it takes a child to approach the box. So if you give them no information, the average time to approach the box is that 0 line. It's a Z-score, basically. Anything below the line means they're quicker than average to approach the box. So if you told them a positive story, they will be quicker than average to go and stroke it. If you tell them a negative story, that's above the 0, that means they're taking longer. They're delaying how long it takes them to go and put their hand in the box. So just a very short story about a novel animal is enough to change children's cognitions and how willing they are to engage with an animal. And if you think about how over time that unwillingness to engage would sort of add up and add up and add up, over years and years and years, that could end up being a sort of a more pervasive problem. What about vicarious learning? So rather than telling them stories, we show them pictures of the animals, either alongside a picture of a smiley face or a scared face. Again, if you look at how their attitudes to the animals change, if you don't show them any faces, you just show them pictures of the animals, then their attitudes are sort of just the positive side of neutral, and they stay so over a 3-month period. If you show them the animal paired with people looking scared, their fear beliefs go up slightly. This is not nowhere near as dramatic effect as the verbal information, but it goes up a bit. And again, even 3 months later, before we do the debrief and stuff, it's still up. And if you show them pictures of animals alongside positive faces, their fear beliefs will go down, and they stay down over a 3-month period as well. So basically, this shows that you can get sort of mild changes in cognition and, again, with behaviour as well. So these are approach times to approach a box containing an animal that they've seen presented on a screen alongside pictures of scared faces or no face, and they take longer to put their hand in the box with the animal where they've seen it alongside scared faces. And this is just on a computer screen. It's just static images. It's not a particularly impressive manipulation. So in the interest of redressing the balance, because I showed you some vicarious kind of learning video stuff of me interacting with something or other, although it probably won't do you any harm because I didn't tell you what was actually in the box. This is me at a petting zoo where I was trying to do my good deed for the community and show these small children that it's perfectly okay to interact with tarantula. Although, if you look at my facial expression, you can probably see I'm not massively happy. But I was putting a lid on it, and it was mainly because him, and he supports Manchester United, so, it went down in my estimations. But anyway, he basically came into the petting zoo with his children, and this guy was like, oh, who wants to handle the spider? And he goes, no fucking way, I'm not handling that. And I thought, oh, well, that's such a signal to all the children in here. Someone needs to, rise up and show them that it's fine. And so that was me. So there it is. It's a real one. It's not fake. So there you go. You can all leave happy. Now, what about if you sort of combine vicarious learning and information? Well, you could look at media exposure. So when the 9/11 attacks happened in 2001, was it? I don't know. It was a long time ago anyway. There was some research that was done after that about how children had reacted to it. So in this particular study, they were looking at the amount of exposure children had to TV and media coverage of the 9/11 attacks. And they gave them a questionnaire measure of post-traumatic stress disorder around the attack. So were they getting intrusive images and things like that? And the findings from this were absolutely remarkable, in my opinion. So what they showed was, if you look at children that had full-blown diagnostic criteria post-traumatic stress disorder, around 5% of the children met that criteria just from watching the TV. So 5%, I know 5% is not a lot, but when you think about it, just from watching the TV, just from watching news footage, they had full-blown PTSD. Even more remarkable, if you look at those who sort of just missed out on a full diagnosis, that added about another 19% of children. So if you put them together, there's about 1 in 4 children who were close to or receiving a full diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of just watching news footage of the 9/11 attacks. Now, the pink bars are their parents, so these are sort of a bit matched for genetics, not entirely, but a little bit. And the other thing that's interesting here is that the rates in the parents were much lower. So if you add the sort of parents' rates together, you're getting to about sort of 12%, so it's about half as much. So the children in this sample were sort of twice as susceptible to getting some kind of anxiety problem as a result of watching sort of TV and media footage about something fairly catastrophic. And
you know, that would have had some verbal information within it. It would have had, in a way, directly traumatic images, like the planes going into the buildings in itself could be quite traumatic to a young child. And also lots of vicarious learning, seeing people's reactions as they're doing vox pops and things like that. So it just shows how these sort of pathways can combine to create quite bad anxiety problems. So to sum all of this up, there is evidence for these pathways, direct traumatic experiences. There's a little Albert study, but there's hundreds, literally hundreds of conditioning studies in adults where you use electric shocks to induce fears in people, and you know, there's tons of evidence that works. I just sort of threw up some of our own research, but there's other research as well that shows that verbal information, for example, affects cognition about animals, about new animals. It can affect your physiological reactions. That was a different study I didn't talk about. And also behaviour. But also if you ask adult phobics, they often remember hearing information about the thing that they're scared of. Vicarious learning. Also, there's evidence, like I threw up some results from one of our studies in children. Again, there's retrospective reports from adult phobics who say, yes, I remember some kind of vicarious learning experience. There's also experiments in monkeys. If you take laboratory-reared monkeys who've never encountered a snake before, and you get them to observe a wild monkey reacting to a snake, and the wild monkey will generally react pretty fearfully, then the lab-bred monkeys, even though they've never encountered a snake before, the first time they encounter it will also display those signs of distress and fear. So they've vicariously learnt to fear the snake through seeing another monkey's reactions. And like I said, there's evidence not just from the study I presented, but there's lots of studies that have shown that it's called second-hand terrorism. If you look at sort of children's responses to TV news coverage of wars and things like that, a proportion of children are quite badly affected by it. So to sum up, anxiety develops through many routes. I've only covered a few of them. So direct experiences, vicarious learning, verbal information. We've also talked about evolution. We've talked about the experience of fear, the fight or flight mechanism, and why those are important in helping us to adapt. And we've looked at the sorts of things that enhance your fear, like being in the dark and taking your attention and taking cues from your own body and things like that. And the learning that you have is also going to be affected, obviously, we talked about your genes and by your personality or temperament and things like that. But also the nature of the stimulus, this preparedness theory that certain things like snakes and spiders are, in fact, easier to learn about than other stimuli. Okay, so that's it from me. Have a fantastic, I don't know if this is your last lecture, but if it is, have a fantastic Christmas. And I won't see you till second year, but enjoy the rest of first year.